The Edwards Syndrome Association is a 100% volunteer 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to advocacy, equal care, education, and rights of people with Edwards syndrome. The ESA strives to empower parents to advocate while working to help break barriers for those with Edwards syndrome. This podcast is for educational purposes only. For all medical advice, please speak with your medical providers. Thank you for joining us and for breaking barriers with us.
Welcome to the Breaking Barriers podcast, where we talk all things Edwards syndrome, special needs, therapy, disability, and everything in between.
Welcome to another episode of the Breaking Barriers podcast. Today, I am joined by my co-hosts, Robert and Kelly, as well as our very special guest, Betsy Hjelmgren, with Feed to Succeed. Betsy is a pediatric nutritionist with a wealth of knowledge around complex kids, feeding tubes, G-tube weaning, and beyond. I would like to hand it over to Betsy to tell us a little bit more about herself before we get into our conversation.
All right, thanks, Gina. So I'll give you a little brief overview, and I know you probably have questions for me, but I have been a dietitian since 1999, which ages me. But that's 26 years now, hard to believe. And I have been in pediatrics this entire 26 years. That was my passion from the beginning. I went into it wanting to work with kids and worked in hospitals for a little over 10 years before starting my practice when my youngest child was born, so that I could have flexibility and do what I wanted, make my own schedule, and things have evolved from there.
Perfect. Well, we're very happy to have you here.
Thank
So
you.
since our focus is kind of around Trisomy 18, and complex kids, could you tell us a little bit about your passion with nutrition as it relates to complex kiddos?
Yes, and I could talk about it for a long time. I'm going to tell you the whole story. I mentioned I've always been interested in working with kids, and I started out 4 years in outpatient pediatrics with a major medical center, and that was great. Then I decided I was going to go to a primary pediatric care center. I don't know if you want me naming names. I'm just staying neutral at the moment, but I went over there and really actually went there with a 20% pay cut, but with the desire to just work with kids and the experts and really get to know um, pediatrics. And it was great because I really learned from the ground up. So when I went to this pediatric hospital, I started in the NICU with the newborn tiniest babies. And that was super eye-opening for me, having just all my career at that point, the whole 4 years, just worked with older children, to start working with these tiny little babies. And so learned so much. One of my favorite neonatologists, they would have residents rotating once a month, and his first day soapbox speech was always, we have to get the babies to be able to breathe and to be able to eat, and that's what they need to do to survive. And that kind of gave me such a sense of value to nutrition, because that was like 50% of the goal. And I was there for 6 years in the NICU there. And during that time, I was in my late 20s, early 30s, started to want to build my own family and really struggled with fertility. So here I am seeing all these babies being born, really struggling and really longing for my own baby. And that was a long walk for me. But finally, I did have my first child. And once you have that child, and then you're looking at these babies in the NICU who are struggling to survive, it's a totally different experience when you have your own than when you are just a young practitioner without anything relatable. So I was there, let's see, a couple more years, got pregnant again. And this pregnancy did not go well, but I will tell you, any of you who have known what it is to long for a baby and have fertility issues, how badly you want that to happen. In my second pregnancy, the baby had a stroke halfway through and did not miscarry. So I had to go in and deliver this tiny little guy. And then at that point, I started thinking about these babies who are born with problems. Um, it was heartbreaking. And I think you probably all know from your own experiences that once you experience things yourself, you relate to people differently.
Mm-hmm.
So that for me was very eye-opening. And as I mentioned, a couple of years later, I left and I started my own practice. And in the process of that, as I was growing, I was invited to work in a GI office a couple days a week. And that was great because then I got all that GI experience, digestion, and all of that. And I developed a really good relationship with her, that GI doctor. And I was with her for, I guess, 10 years before her practice got bought by Lurie and she was no longer doing that. But amidst that, and I know I'm really talking a long time, but around 2015, I had the opportunity to start working in early intervention. And this was new to me too. I didn't realize up till that point that early intervention even offered nutrition, and it doesn't everywhere. I'm in Illinois, and in Illinois, nutrition is considered a vital part of children's growth and development and readiness for learning in school. So they do cover nutrition services. So this was a great opportunity for me. And at that point, really, that is when I really started to feel really passionate about working with kids with special needs because I was able to take what I had learned from the NICU and from GI and get into the lives of these families. And back then, we were still, it was pre COVID, we were still going into families' homes. And so I was going into these family homes and seeing what they were going through firsthand. It's completely different than when you're seeing somebody in a clinic and you're just hearing what they're saying. And you get so attached. You get attached to the child, you get attached to the mother, you get attached to the dad, you get attached to everybody there, and you're watching this child grow and develop, and you become their cheerleader. You just want them to thrive. And so at that point, it was like my heart was gone. I was all in. And since then, this has been really my passion. And I will tell you, in terms of just who I am, my faith's a big part of what drives me. And I have a really strong passion for justice and for people who are less fortunate or who, in my perspective, which could be probably argued, but who I feel like are disadvantaged. And so that fuels me sometimes too much because I can get really on a high horse and defensive. But I think that also has made me good at what I do. I love to help people. I love to advocate for people. I really get over emotionally involved with some of my kiddos. And that's kind of what's got me to this point.
Wonderful. Well, that, I mean, definitely shows your amazing passion. That is for sure. And I think you may have even touched on this a little bit. But what is your very favorite part about managing nutrition for complex kids? If you can pick
I,
one.
it's hard. I love getting involved in the life of a family and a child and seeing them grow and blossom. And nutrition, that's our primary goal, is growth. And
Mm-hmm.
I love to be part of that journey. And I love to see families, children, because when you're a parent and you can't feed your child, that is such a loss and a grief. Because that's one of our primary jobs as parents is to be able to feed and nourish our children. And when I am able to be part of a journey of a family being able to feed their child and feeling good about what they're feeding their child and seeing their child grow and develop in a way that the family feels involved and part of, it gives me joy.
Yes, and that's so important because as parents, I mean, all three of us on here have been through it with our kiddos where they've struggled gaining weight and have had heart defects and medical issues and all of that going on, which also, as you could probably speak to, really delays the growth. So it's so important to have a nutritionist that understands the perspective of the parents. So that is perfect. So piggybacking off of that, what is the most difficult part of managing nutrition for complex kids?
Can I say two things?
Of course.
Okay. One is that I don't like when I can't fix things. And there are some kids who are super complicated and it's not anything anybody's doing. There, some
Mhm.
kids you can only get to good enough. You can't get them to, fully succeed.
Fully looking healthy.
Yes. Right. And so that for me is a struggle because I struggle to not take it personally and feel like I'm doing my job badly. But some kids, you can only help them so much, and that still has so much value. But I really just, that's a hard thing. And the other thing is, inevitably, that's been hard part is, as a mom and as a parent, some kids just don't make it. And once you get really involved with these kids, it's pretty heartbreaking. And I have in my office a bulletin board of family photos and Christmas cards and things that people have sent me over the years of the kiddos we've lost. And that is sad, but I do keep it there to remind me that it's hard. It's a hard journey, and these kids still had these lives, and they were impactful to the people around them.
And I know families too. I mean, unfortunately, loss is a part of the trisomy 18 community as well. And so, just from talking to other parents with kiddos that have passed, it means so much to them to have providers like you that do remember their kids and honor them still and do things like that. So I know lost parents that it has to mean so much to them. Um, so kind of switching gears a little bit here. And we have Robert on, who actually is like the dad blending champion, if you would say. So my next question, can we start talking a little bit about blending feeds? And if you could kind of give us an overview on that so we can open up a conversation related to that. Because I feel like that is a big thing that is always discussed in our community. Should I blend for my child? Something that we're actually finding, there's no research on this yet, but just from communicating with so many families, hopefully there will be research in the future, but we're finding that vitamin A levels are high in a lot of kids with trisomy 18. And we've been finding that the only way to really manage that is by blending feeds, because so much of the packaged options have high vitamin A, and obviously you can't remove it. So I feel like this is a very important topic to kind of hit on for our community. So can you just tell us a little bit about blending feeds and how that works with the G-tube?
Sure. And you can pop in and ask me questions if you want me to go one way or the other. But
Perfect.
in this topic, it's very timely because I have connected with another person in the feeding community who's retiring, and we are putting together a webinar on this very topic right now. So I have been doing a lot of just reflecting and digging into old patient files about this. And so I will tell you the first, because I just pulled it out, the first child that I ever worked with a blended feed on, this family called me, and this was 2015, and they wanted to make homemade blends for their kids. They didn't know where to go. The dietitian and the GI team had told them, no, that's not safe. And I was in a private practice, and they called me and they said, can you help me? And I said, well, sure, why not? Because that's the benefit of being in a private practice, is you don't have to be under the thumb of somebody else. Yeah. So I started looking into it and teaching myself about it. And as time went on, and that kid, I will tell you, night and day, stopped vomiting as soon as he got on blended food. And this was before we were doing like thick syringe blends, realizing that thick feeds reduced gagging and retching and vomiting. This was just like, let's give this kid food instead of formula. It was still thin. It was still running by a pump. And I'm almost ashamed to look back and be like, that's how I did it. But that's what I knew at the time, because that's not how I do it anymore. But that's all I knew at the time. And we blended food together, and parents were able to use the foods in their home and in their family and what they wanted to feed their child. And I was amazed. This kid, like, he developed color in his cheek. He started growing better. He stopped vomiting. It was like, wow. And that was so inspiring that this kind of directed my path toward that. The second piece of that, I was working in this GI office that I mentioned before. And one of the things that was great about her was she was very nutritionally proactive and open. And so she too was hearing anecdotally people are using blended feeds, seeing good outcomes. So she was also interested in that. So with some of her patients, she started letting me play with some of this and introduce some blended food. And I'm part of a group, a nutrition professionals group through NASPGAN, which is a bigger pediatric GI organization, national organization. And so I went to their annual conference, and there was a presenter from one of the Ohio Children's Hospitals who talked about blended feeds. And it was really good opportunity to hear and learn more. And again, this was a long time ago. At that point, it was like, let's open some jars of baby food and mix it all together. And now we have blended food and we'll mix in a little formula. And everything now sounds so archaic. But, the process developed over time. And the more we did it, the more positive outcomes you would see. And then, as you guys probably know, these commercial blended food options started to become available. And really slowly, some of the attitudes about blended feeds have opened, which has been great. Um, but as more and more research came out, especially that Pentiac article, I don't know if you guys know that, that's one of the first published articles about blended food reducing gagging, enriching, and vomiting. Kids felt better, started accepting some food by mouth. This was kind of a really big turning point in the medical community, just because then we had an article to say, hey, look, there's research here. So that kind of pushed things forward with that, because then you could go to a doctor who was saying no and say, but hey, look, this is what this group found in this study. And that's really the way to get doctors to come around, is to hand them a study. So that was part of it too. And I know I'm kind of really going on a long tangent, but I will say, the benefit of being in a private practice and the benefit of having worked with this really open-minded GI doc was the opportunity when you come across a family who wants to experiment. Not everybody does, and I'm not pushing that on somebody who's not comfortable, but when you come across a family who wants to try something different and they haven't received support, and you say, hey, I'm going to help you, it's an opportunity for really truly scientific research. It's one-on-one case studies, but you try something, it doesn't work, you try something else, and it's been really great. And because I'm in such a concentrated, specific area, population, I've just been able to have so much experience with it that I think other people don't have, even in the hospital setting, because I think these dietitians in the hospital setting are probably like part of a bigger clinic or a bigger group where they may see a handful of these kids on tube feedings, but it's not all their patients. But for myself, because I love that so much, and those are the kind of clients that I've attracted, probably it depends on the given moment, but probably 50 to 70% of my clientele is tube fed. And it's just opportunities. Try something new, try something new. Um, and generally speaking, I'm kind of the kind of open-minded, hey, let's try it person to begin with. So I guess, did I answer your question?
Yes, you definitely did.
Okay.
No, that's very helpful. And it's amazing because that's kind of how us as parents feel. I feel like it's a lot of trial and error, and a lot of our kids have medical complexities. And so, we're trying to handle various things at once. And it's a known thing with trisomy 18 of the slow growth. And so parents are always worried about that, but they're trying to navigate other medical issues. So I know with Mia, for instance, we started blending feeds because she just wasn't growing, and we wanted to try to help her in any way we possibly could. Simultaneously, we kind of got that pancreatic insufficiency diagnosis and figured that piece out almost at the same time as when we started blending her feeds. But we also just found that it seems like it helps her gut and it was helping. So we've just kind of stuck with it since. But like you said, it's trial and error. Like there's been times where we've gone back and forth a bit. We've made a lot of changes. And I feel like that's, something that everyone on this journey is kind of doing. So,
Mhm.
yes, you definitely answered the question.
Okay.
Well, one thing I wanted to kind of touch on in comparison between you as like a private practice from our personal experience with you, as well as like an in person when we're in a hospital, that's a good catalyst for at least a start to engage in a conversation for us to learn to come to you. But you and learning with you, you've been such a fantastic teacher to both Gina and I for Mia, just in the fact that you've provided us such substance that now when we
Mhm.
go and we talk about what her feeds are, it's second nature, at least for me, because as Gina mentioned, I'm the blender. But essentially, what I'm getting at is the pediatricians that we talk to when we go in and when Mia's in the hospital, they're flabbergasted by our knowledge and how we're able to
Mhm.
rattle it off. And also, when we mention you in our general area, they're like, "Oh, I know Betsy." So, like,
Mhm.
we know we have the best in the area, but also I just wanted to relay to you that you're such a fantastic teacher in teaching us about our own nutrition for the benefit of Mia. So I
Mm,
think that's something that you haven't mentioned that yet about like the teaching and how to work with the families, but that's
mhm,
a great catalyst that you've established within us is now when we do our check-ins, it's not an hour. It's like
mhm,
15 to 20 minutes because like, hey, we just need to get over like this next hurdle. What's your suggestion? Type of thing. Whereas like before it was like, okay, we need to write down the numbers, document it, and like, oh, we need to change this entirely. Now it's just little tweaks here and there. And that's
mhm,
just come with understanding what Mia does. And also, as you're aware, and I'm not sure if Gina's going to touch on this, but like the transition to keto and then coming back from keto and
mhm.
like that transition. So I kind of lost my train of thought on where I was going, but I just wanted to make a comment and thankful to you for your teaching skills for us and me as growth as well.
I
Yeah, I
appreciate that.
think,
And I will say,
sorry, go ahead, Betsy.
okay, I was just gonna say, Robert, I remember one of early on getting on a Zoom with a screen share and just teaching you to do this. And some families aren't up for that, but some are. And I think that you have to meet them where they're at. And like you were hungry for knowledge and you were a numbers guy. And so that worked for you. I think it became like fun for you almost, which
I
is
love it.
amazing, right? And
Yeah,
not everybody
I
wants to do
love it.
that. And I just want to say that that's okay, that not everybody wants
Right.
to do that. There's other options and you can still feed your kid really good food. But yeah, it's fun for me to see you guys, what you're doing, and you teach me and I teach you and we learn together.
Likewise.
Yeah, I think that the education is critical. Just and even just like you said before, like there's so many ways to feed your child through a G tube, and it doesn't have to all be throwing stuff in a blender. Like it could be like buying certain baby foods and mixing it together. Like you said, we did that for a while. And I know for me personally, I'm very grateful that Robert enjoys doing this so much because I will tell you that if he didn't, like we probably wouldn't be doing it exactly how we are because I will blend her feeds when he's not available in those given instances, but otherwise I'm like I couldn't do this as often as he does. So you're totally right that you just have to find what works for you. And
And
so given
and
the
for
education,
well that part before part of it as like my daughter used to eat by mouth up until 6 months and she got oral version from intubation and extubation. That's how we ended up with a G tube.
Mhm.
And she's been on the commercial ever since. And I've met with nutritionists, dietitians about blending, but it's like what I got was like a website, like put the plot, plot, plot,
Mhm.
plot, plot. And it's a little intimidating for parents who haven't done it because I also, like you mentioned, get told, oh, that it's harder, it's not as safe. And I've heard all that about
I'm sure.
doing it for my daughter. So that's why I haven't. I mean, we are working on feeding by mouth because she used to eat by mouth and she's finally starting to accept it and take bites from me. But
Mhm.
my goal was to get her to the blended foods to, like you said, get her more interested in by mouth.
Mhm.
And that's like, I think that's a big thing in the community too, is the intimidation of it.
Mhm.
And
yeah, I mean, and I feel like that's kind of where Betsy is a hidden gem, and we're very
Mhm.
lucky living where we are and having her access to her because I mean, like Robert said, she's been able to really educate us and teach us. And we utilize a website, but I feel like we go to you too when it's like Mia's overly constipated or like we have a question about something specific and we're like, what can we replace this in her feeds with to make her constipation better or what has the least amount of vitamin A in it, like
Mhm.
the websites can only help you so much. You need somebody to guide you, especially in like that beginning stage. So I mean, intimidation is like the perfect way to put it, Kelly. So kind of piggybacking off of that, Betsy, I know you mentioned just a little bit ago that you're actually putting something together on blending feeds. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, and if that's something that like we may be able to utilize in our community as like a resource for people?
So yes and no, because it's not fully materialized yet, so I don't know how it's going to end up looking.
Okay.
But yes, that the initial audience for this webinar we're putting on is to teach providers more,
Okay.
feeding therapists. But to your point, Gina and Kelly, while you were talking, I had like 50 other things pop in my head I wanted to say, so I think I'm going to forget some of them. But to what you're saying now, I know we didn't really want to go all the way here. There are so many complexities in providers providing services out of state, but there's no limit to teaching classes. I can teach anybody. I can't give necessarily one-to-one individual counseling, but if you guys wanted to put together some different classes, some different levels, that's fair game. Anybody can,
Perfect.
we can do classes. That's no problem at all. So Kelly, to your point that you've been using these commercial products, I don't know how you feel, obviously, but I don't want you to feel like, oh, I should be doing better. Because think about all these kids who are on the chicken nugget diet,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's like, I think that my families who are doing blended feeds of any type, whether it's from a package or from scratch, those kids are so much better nourished than the average child.
Yeah, she's on Real Food Blends. So it's Real Food Parade, but it's
Mhm.
one of the things that another trisomy 18 mom talks about here of what her son's on. He's same age as my daughter. And she's like, I asked him, but she's like, I feel bad feeding him the same thing over
Mhm.
and over.
Mhm.
Like with blended foods, you could probably get more variety. But
Mhm.
it's like, are they really getting the nutrition? Because it's like the same thing over and over and over. Whereas with us, we eat this pasta one day, or we eat spaghetti, or not
Mhm.
spaghetti, something else another day, you know?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, yes, good nutrition is about, can we build in enough different nutrients, and that comes from different types of foods and variety.
Mm-hmm.
But there's like this whole spectrum, and you still have this whole group of kids who have a tube and they get Pediasure, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
my
Oh
daughter
my
got that.
goodness. Right? So, I mean, I feel like if you are on Pediasure and you can add in 1 carton of baby food per day, you've made a step, right? And
Yeah.
then, you know, every step you take is progress.
I mean, I'll
Yeah. And I
admit,
mean,
Mia has the best diet in our entire family.
Right?
And
Yeah.
there's no shame in saying that because it's repetitive. It's like the people, I was just over here eating chicken and rice because I'm trying to help my own self worth, I guess you could say. So, I mean, my
I've thought
daughter
that
eats better than
before.
all of us. Yeah. Yeah.
I
So,
know
I
there's
mean,
times where,
the repetition isn't an issue.
mm,
But it ultimately boils down to having a good individual to confide in, like you, or a pediatrician that's willing to have open conversations like you and some of the ones we've had when we've been inpatient.
My husband still brags about the 40 days in a row he ate pizza in college. I
Oh my
mean,
God.
right?
That's U of I special for sure.
Yeah.
yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Well, and I feel like too, it might be like a repetitive thing, but as long as it's like balanced and you're checking all the boxes of the food groups, like that's really what's
Yeah,
important.
she said that's what she was told, that he's getting all the nutrients, so it's
Yeah.
fine. It's just
And I
the
Mhm.
think
thought that you
Yeah.
think.
And I think that's the hardest part too with blending is it's truly hard to get to that fully balanced, making sure your child is getting enough of all of the little things, all of the vitamins, not too high, not too little. And that's where I feel like with Kelly, where when you said intimidation, that's like the perfect way to put it because
Mhm.
you give them too much of something and a vitamin may be sky high, and then for complex kids like that could be a very big issue. And so I feel like that's kind of why we almost stick to like the same, like we might tweak something here or there, but like overall, like even with blending we stick to like the same recipe because we know it checks all the boxes perfectly, and that we're not giving her too little or too much of something and gonna throw something else off. So that's just an interesting kind of viewpoint. So kind of going back to, I know we've touched on like different applications and stuff that you can use to help with blending, and how, they have pros and cons. What are there any specific apps that you like to utilize, Betsy, that you would recommend families check out if they are interested in looking at blending?
I have two primary apps that I use in my practice with or without blended foods. One is MyFitnessPal, which I just love it because it's easy on my phone. If I want to look up any food at any given moment, I can just real quick just look. Um, it's a little tricky sometimes because sometimes there's like 50 mashed potatoes and you're like, which mashed potato is the right one? But it's a good reference, right? And the other one, which I've taught with you guys, is Chronometer.
Hmm.
And that's a website, and there's a free version, and the free version works totally fine. You don't have to pay for anything fancy. And I build my recipes in there because it has a really good database and you get a lot of details on the micronutrients. So those are places I go. I will say one of the problems, I think one of the struggles for people who don't have medical background and access is knowing like what are our goals, where do we need to be with calories and protein and these micronutrients, the vitamins, the minerals that you've kind of alluded to. It's hard to go. I mean, you can go to NIH and research each individual one, but like vitamin A for a child, 1 to 3 years versus when they turn 4, and like all those
Mhm.
details, you kind of have to pay attention to that stuff.
Yes, agreed. And that's where you're phenomenal with helping with those, those
Thanks.
little things that people might not even think about, because obviously you do need to think about that if you're going to start blending for your child. Because like Kelly said, I feel like that's why certain even nutritionists are intimidated by it,
Mhm.
because it's just, yeah, you have to just really have that passion and be able to really be good at it.
I
I
think too,
also
Gina, like,
learned I I also learned I pronounced the app wrong. It's chronometer. I've
I don't
always
know.
called
We
it
always say
So what?
chronometer.
chronometer.
I think
Exactly.
a lot of people say chronometer, but my philosophy is if you just own it and go with it, that's the way you're supposed to say it.
I mean, you sounded
I thought
very
it was
confident.
fine.
That was
So
Exactly.
as
I didn't know any
sophisticated as I've
different.
ever heard the app made.
I
So we're
mean,
going with that. It's
I can't
okay.
chronometer from now
remember.
on.
I can't
chronometer.
remember what website I was given. I know it's from a dietitian that's out of CHOP. Um, and she's the one that did that website. That's the one that they gave me. But I would have to look in her papers to see what it is
Yeah.
that they use.
One of the things that we've said a couple times, just circling back there, Gina, that you've talked about, like the vitamin A and um, the complexity of kids who have underlying diagnoses is what makes it so hard, because most of the kids in the general population who are eating by mouth are eating crap, but it also doesn't affect them.
Right.
Yeah. We know how that goes with having a 3-year-old. It's like, it just having her eat something some days is a win.
Yeah.
Whether it's mac and cheese or chicken nuggets or Rice Krispie treat cereal, like some days it's like you can't even get them to eat anything. So
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that's always something too that I feel like parents of complex kids, like we forget, is we're always like, oh my gosh, we're worried. We're feeding them out of a package. And, is it
Mhm.
really the best thing for them? But at the end of the day, they're
Look
getting
at the
a better,
packages. Yeah,
Yeah,
look at
the
the
typical
packages on
kids
the
are
back of those frozen chicken tenders and
yeah,
chicken nuggets and
exactly.
yeah, the
waffles and
typical
French
kids
toast
are
sticks.
regulating like their body. They're like, this is what I have been told, is like they're regulating so they know like I'm not hungry.
Mhm.
Um, I don't want that. That's not what I want. Like same as us. Like today I want pizza,
Mhm.
Whereas with the medically complex kids, a lot of them, especially tube fed, don't get hungry.
Yeah.
They don't feel that.
Yeah.
Um, and that's just the way I've always thought about it. And I think that's
Yeah.
why when I asked about it, they were saying that it's more scary for complex kids to be on blends because of all the medical aspects of it.
Mhm. Yeah, but
That's what I was
sometimes,
gathering.
sometimes more scary and more challenging doesn't mean worse, because
Wrong.
like you're saying, Gina, like if you didn't blend and you had to use some commercial product, you wouldn't have the flexibility to adjust the
Yeah.
details like you do.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that was actually my next question is, what do you feel the benefits are of blending over the, the packaged options? You know, kind of like what you just said, do you have anything else that, you know, I guess the cons of using the packaged options versus
Mhm.
blending?
Well, I will say I don't want to make one good and one bad because you have to do what works for
Mm-hmm.
you. But some of the things that are nice about blending is being able to adjust some of the details there if your child has a special dietary need. I see kids with so many different dietary things. A lot of things like they can't have dairy or they, you know,
Mm-hmm.
which there's dairy-free formulas available, but like you mentioned with Mia and vitamin A, or I've had kids who needed low FODMAP, and you can't necessarily get that from a commercial product because you get what you get. So that's one thing. The other thing too, I think just information, things we know about nutrition is that fresh foods have more just natural biodiversity and they have more probiotics and more greater variety in terms of things that we don't even know, that there's still science learning about probiotics and prebiotics and all of this. And those aren't in packaged foods. Maybe like in real food blends, some of it is the fiber and some of those phytonutrients, but the live organisms, like we know right now, kombucha is such a hot thing. Like these live organisms are only going to be available in something that's made fresh, not something that's packaged. And I think that we are going to see probably over the next, too long for my career, but 50 years, a big growth in that direction of knowledge. Like, what do we really understand about microorganisms and how that affects digestion and human health? Because we know they're good. We know some are better than others. We know some are bad. But do we really know the details of that? No, but people are studying it. And I think those are some of the unknown benefits that kids are getting from eating fresh foods at this point.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, I would say too, or I guess I have a couple of comments on that. So the first one is, what is like your viewpoint on, because I think a big turnoff for me personally with like the packaged options are like the shelf life on them.
Mhm.
Like the fact that you could literally have it on your shelf for a year and they say that it's safe for your child to eat. Like what is your viewpoint on that? Because to me it just seems like if it's really like, is that really safe? Like, do you want to eat something that's a year old? So I guess that's kind of like a question that parents may have is like, why is the shelf life so long if this is so good for my child,
Well, let me ask you this. Do you ever eat any canned foods?
Yes.
And you're eating older food.
Mhm.
And some
So
of
it's
them are
similar to that.
nutritious. Yeah, because they have to be processed by heat and they have to kill all the microorganisms in order for the product, once it's airtight and oxygen proof, oxygen free,
Okay.
that the product isn't going to degrade or decompose. It has to be everything that's in there. It's like canning a jam. You have to
Mhm.
boil it for 10 minutes in boiling water to make sure there's
Yeah.
no bacteria left in it so that it won't go
And
bad
make
when
sure
it's
it
closed.
seals.
Hmm.
So it's essentially why it's being found that, the blending may have like it has the microorganisms that some of the packaged stuff doesn't have because you're essentially removing that to give it that shelf life.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, see, I didn't know that. And that was like, I'm like, and it makes sense because yes, we eat pasta and we eat canned goods and we eat stuff all the time that has a long shelf life like that. But that's why you also have like veggies or something with it that you
Hmm.
are getting those microorganisms.
But think
So
about the
that's
people who never eat a fresh vegetable. Is it better for them to eat a canned vegetable or no vegetable?
a canned vegetable. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, that's a good way to put it. Um, and I think another kind of good thing too with like the packaged options is there are so many. Like there's even a keto friendly one and
Hmm.
there's the ones that don't have dairy. And I feel like there's a lot of options to be able to try too. So for like families that it's just too much for them to blend or, they don't
Hmm.
have an amazing nutritionist like you to really walk them through it. I feel like the one good thing with where we're at currently in times is there's so many different options,
Hmm.
which is really good. So before we kind of shift gears a little bit, do you have any other topics or anything related to kind of blending versus packaged or anything like that? Because our next kind of and final topic, I would say, is related to like G-tube weaning.
Mhm. I'm sure if we kept talking about blended foods, I would have more to say, but we can move on.
We could probably talk about it forever, right?
Yeah.
Um, okay, so switching gears to the G-tube weaning topic, what is your philosophy with this?
I have very strong opinions about this.
Why we have you on, Betsy.
People aren't going to always agree with my opinions, and that's okay. The research has shown over and over again that a major reason kids get stuck on their feeds is because they're not hungry. And I think we've talked about that a little bit already today, that these kids are on a feeding tube and they haven't learned appetite regulation. Even if they do feel hunger, they don't know what that is because they're not naturally eating and feeling the resolution of that. And so it's no surprise to me that kids don't eat well when they're on a feeding tube. And so there are people who think, hey, we can't wean this kid. They don't know how to eat. And it's like, well, they don't, why would they want to? And how are they ever going to learn if they never feel motivation, right? Because we all, like when we're comfortable, you're not going to go do something uncomfortable unless there's a reason, right? Because it's hard, especially for children. Children naturally, if it's hard, I don't want to do it, right? So if it's easy, you're going to stay where you're at. And I always say to people, and I know I'm getting really philosophical, if you're not uncomfortable, you're not going to change. And discomfort, even though we don't like it, is really, really important in terms of growth. And so that is kind of where I'm coming from in terms of tube weaning. You have to make these kids hungry. That's the first thing I will tell you. And people are scared to do that, which I totally understand because we're looking, especially a lot of the kids who are in tubes, not just trisomy 18, a lot of these kids have medical complexities and they've had traumatic births and they've had surgeries. And the parents have been told your child has to gain weight, your child has to gain weight to go home, and your child has to gain weight to survive. And it's been drilled into the parents. And the people in the hospitals are only seeing these kids when they're acutely ill. And so their philosophy too is, oh my gosh, this kid has to gain weight because they know they lose weight and they don't heal as fast and all that in an acute setting. Yes. But once we get home and these kids are stable, we can't just stay where we are if we want to move, right? I can't sit here and then get to my front door. I have to get up and do something different. And when these kids are stuck on their tubes and they're constantly fed and they're never hungry, nothing's going to change. So that's the preface of this. So I think kids have to be hungry. I think there's some risk involved. I think it's understandable because people are scared. Both the parents and the medical people are both scared, especially your hospital-based medical people. I understand all of that. So we need families and we need providers who have positive experiences doing this to come along these communities of folks and say, listen, it's okay if your child doesn't get enough calories for a week, your child's going to survive, but they're going to learn hunger. And that's the first step. And people need to be willing to say, we can do a calorie cut for a short amount of time. It's not going to cause long-term problems to the child. And it's an opportunity. It's an exploration. What happens when this child feels hunger? The kid's going to show you within 1 to 2 weeks whether or not they're going to start being more interested in food. So I have seen that over and over again. You cut the calories, you're going to know within 1 week, sometimes 2 for the chunky kids, because it takes longer for them to get hungry, if that child has the potential to eat. And you're not causing the child long-term harm, no matter what anybody says. You're not, right? We have all had a week where we didn't eat that much. And human bodies are built to survive starvation for longer than a week. And I don't cut calories to the point where I'm not feeding a child at all. But I do go aggressive because, again, studies have shown you do a 10 or 20% calorie cut, the kid feels a little bit hungrier, but they don't know what's going on. And so maybe they eat a little bit, but they lose weight. I mean, this is Weight Watchers. You cut a little bit of calories so you can lose weight without really suffering. And so why would we drag this out for 6 weeks, these 10% calorie cuts, 20% calorie cuts, making the child lose weight? They're a little more motivated, but not really getting anywhere. It doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't. And so the scary approach is the best approach. And studies have shown you have to be aggressive. You have to do a big calorie cut um, under medical supervision. We don't want anybody's child suffering dehydration and ending up in the ER. But you have to take a big risk to get a big gain. That's the bottom line. And anybody who doesn't agree with that just doesn't have experience with that and they're scared. That's just the bottom line. And I'll stop there because you probably have places you want to go with that.
No, I mean, I appreciate you being very straightforward with that because it's, you know, there's probably so many different opinions on it. And I mean, it makes sense to cut a larger amount in a shorter period to kind of see what the child does versus dragging it out and having those negatives occur anyways, or even occur worse than they otherwise would. I mean, we've been through this with you personally.
Hey,
Go ahead,
Betsy,
Robert.
is it in comparison to now this is more of like a weight loss strategy, but kind of like an intermittent fasting, just trying to think of a perspective that parents can possibly put themselves in when their child's going through like a G tube wean. What's kind of a comparison that we could kind of put ourselves physically in and maybe even do alongside our child? Kind of like how,
Sure. Have
the
fun with it.
worst case scenario that I just thought of was like when a child has like a cancer diagnosis and like the
Mm,
dad shaves their head bald for like to present to the child, here, I'll walk through with this with you. So like
mhm.
for parents like that, what would kind of be like a grown up comparison to what a G tube wing would feel like?
I would compare it to like doing one of those juice cleanses,
Okay,
right? You're getting
that
some
would be it.
calories, you're getting some fluids, you're not dying of starvation, but you're pretty hungry, but especially by the third, fourth, fifth day, right?
Yeah, those are struggles.
Right.
Mhm. And
That's,
all
I
you want
think,
to do is
what
eat
I would say.
pizza. Whereas
Yes.
in this case, the motivation is trying to get the child to just eat. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, that's an interesting way to put it. So
Well,
kind of going back.
that's like what they did with my daughter before she had the G tube. I refused the G tube because she was eating by mouth.
Hmm.
And so, like you were talking about the healing, like they don't like to do it because of the healing. Well, she was being fed by NG tube after
Hmm.
cardiac surgery. And I was like, well, she's not going to eat by mouth because you guys are constantly feeding her.
Hmm.
So they would stop during the day for me to try, but they would only stop so long because of the healing. So it
Hmm.
was like a vicious cycle.
Hmm.
And then finally, I just agreed to the G tube because they wanted to send her to a different facility that focused on feeding. And
Hmm.
I was not leaving my daughter because I couldn't
Hmm.
stay with her. So, I mean, I go back and forth as to whether I should have, to where I couldn't stay the night with her. I could be there,
Hmm.
but to did I make the right decision with getting the G tube, you know?
Hmm.
And that's like what I thought about when you were talking about the healing, because that is what they tell you.
Hmm.
And
And it's true, right? In an acute
yeah,
setting, it's probably not appropriate to starve a child
I mean,
when they're trying to heal.
they were right, but I was also like, I don't want that in my child when she
Hmm.
was eating by mouth like
Hmm.
7 days ago. You know what I
And I
mean?
think, Kelly, part of the problem too is the medical community is focused on the medical outcome, and not all of them. There's wonderful, wonderful people, but a lot of
Hmm.
people aren't looking at the psychosocial piece and the emotional piece and all of that as well. And that carries weight that can't be disregarded.
It's interesting too, your comment about, in the acute setting, how they're so focused on, making sure the child is gaining weight. Because Mia's recent hospitalization, she was in for a GI bleed, so she was NPO for 1 week and then back NPO for multiple days. And so she was dropping a little bit of weight, but as you know, Mia's BMI is high, so we've been trying to get that down anyways. And I remember like she was fine from the GI bleed perspective, but nutrition was getting a little concerned. They're like, oh, she keeps dropping weight. We need to up her calories. And I'm like, we have to look at the whole picture here because I'm like in the grand scheme of things, like leaving here, this is actually a good thing because we're trying to get her BMI down. So it's just interesting, like the different perspectives, like you said, because like in that setting, like they really wanted to see her gaining weight, but
Yeah.
like as her parents and then like working with you, like we knew the importance of getting her BMI back to a healthy range as well. And so it's also hard as parents too, because you're like getting so much information from so many different people. So I also feel like too, it's also why education is so important and finding like who you can trust. Not that we can't trust the people in the hospital, but just knowing that like you also have that outpatient help and remembering kind of like our conversations and asking the questions and not necessarily pushing back, but like giving that information to the other providers so they kind of understand like this is why we don't want to increase our calories right now because these are our goals at home and stuff. And I mean, in our case, usually once we kind of give them the facts and the information and stuff like that, like they totally get it. So I feel like that's just an important part of why education and stuff is so important too. So families are like understanding like the why behind things. So they have that information to help advocate for their child elsewhere too. So just
I want
another
to say
kind of
something else
tidbit.
about that.
Yeah.
And actually, like now I'm thinking of 3 other trains of thought, so we'll see where this goes. But two other things. Like one thing that drives me crazy is overfeeding. Because you guys know, because you have G-tube fed babies, if you overfeed a child, what happens? They throw up, they have reflux, they hate eating, they don't want anything near their mouth and their face. It's the worst. And a lot of people in the medical community want these babies weight so high and like BMI, right? So weight to height ratio, or for the little kids, it's just the weight to height chart. If that's above the 50th percentile, the medical community is thrilled, right? Your baby is just really, um, you know, has a lot of meat on their bones. They're really nourished. But if your baby's above the 50th percentile, 50th is just average weight, their appetite is going to be suppressed. That's one thing. So that's one of the things. Like again, getting to back to the idea of weaning. If you don't have hunger, you're not going to eat. So we don't want appetite suppression. That's like going to backfire. We don't want kids to feel nauseated and full and nasty all the time. So that's like another thing to me that drives me nuts. Oh my gosh, I've had so many arguments about stop overfeeding this child. But I do want to say, and just so that it's clear, that when a child has a surgery, like Kelly, you mentioned the heart surgery, in order to grow cells, which is how you grow new tissue to heal, you have to have enough nutrition. So there are times when you don't want the kid losing weight. And if the child does lose weight, you think about like these people who have bariatric surgery, they are on this really high protein diet because you need the protein. You don't want the weight loss to be coming at the expense of the child trying to heal. And that's tricky too. Like, how much protein do we give these kids, and how do we do that in an acute setting to make sure that they can still heal while not overfeeding them, not making them puke, all that. It is tricky. I do think it's tricky. I think probably in a hospital setting, if you're not going to be there a long time, just go with it and let the kid gain weight and fix it when you get home.
I was going to say that too. That was my thought on that.
Yeah. So going back to the G-tube weaning topic as well, and kind of what you do, Betsy, and the aggressiveness and stuff behind it. Can you tell us a little bit about how successful that you have been with, the way that you go about it?
Depending how you define success, of course, I'm biased. I would say I've got 100% success rate, because even if the child doesn't become an oral eater, when you cut their calories, maybe they start being more interested in putting stuff in their mouth. There's always some positive outcome,
Yeah.
even if the child doesn't end up fully eating by mouth. Or I have kids who will do really good, but they just get fatigued and they can't meet all their needs. So they get bedtime feeds and eat during the day. We have to define success as it can't be black and white, like your kid has a tube or they don't. There's all these middle grounds. And if you do a wean and the child learns a new skill, but still needs their tube, or the child starts drinking. But these are all successes. So in that regard, I would say my success rate is 100%. I will say, have I had kids who tried to wean completely and weren't able? Of course. Some kids aren't going to be able to do that. So we have to have realistic expectations. But even the kids who try to wean, they didn't get off their tube. We went back up on feeds. They still gained something from it. Some of them gained skills. Some of the parents gained knowledge and information about their child. There's always something to be gained.
Yes, no, that makes total sense. And I know for us, when we tried it, it was, it wasn't black and white, like you said. But Mia was eating so much more. It was just, she had, some of the medical things going on. And so she still wasn't gaining weight. And then we had to kind of supplement, and then she wasn't feeling that hunger, like you said. So it's a hard balancing act. But I mean, we definitely had the success. It just, we didn't get to her fully orally eating. But I mean, it's a tricky thing to do. So do you have like resources or anything like on your website that like we could direct anybody to that may be kind of interested in reading more about this? I mean, I know that everybody isn't lucky enough to have somebody like you kind of walking something like this with them. So is there like any kind of go-to resources where you feel, it could be some sort of guide, or even just like research and information that someone could then take to their nutritionist to say like, hey, can we try this? And maybe they could walk alongside them.
Yeah. So on my webpage, there's a tab that says tube weaning, and on that page, there's an explanation of sort of what I do. It's kind of brief, but there are some journal references there that talk
Okay.
about weaning in a hunger challenge way. So there are some websites there. I will tell you that it still may be hard, but I do think if you have a provider, a dietitian, or whoever who is closed-minded, the best thing you can do is connect with other people who've had success.
Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
I've
And
noticed, yeah, with the
no,
when it to the tube weaning. Now I'm not tube weaning her right now. Right now we're working on building the skills, getting her interested and stuff. But what I have done probably within the last month is she was getting 4 feeds a day. I knocked it down to 3 feeds a day, just added a little more into those 3 feeds so that she's basically getting most of the amount of the 4. And now she's getting more interested in food because it's just 3 times spread out. And she's learning. She's like, well, they saw videos of her actually taking bites from me and getting interested again. So I thought that was kind of funny how if you just like adjust it a little bit, then it could be progress of them being interested or taking bites, or she's even moving her tongue better. And,
Yeah,
3 feeds a day is like that's like what us as adults eat, like 3 meals a day
yeah.
and maybe a snack or
And that's
something.
why
So
I
it's like,
thought about it. And I
yeah,
just added, because she's syringe fed, I just added like another syringe to each one so that she's almost really getting what she was getting with the 4. But I wanted it more spread out so that she could have a chance to get hungry and to want something.
And
That works good for some kids.
if I do recall in our case with Mia, Betsy, because Mia was getting, more feeds throughout the day. I think that was actually our first step in the process, was to kind of condense those before we actually did like the big cut in the calories. So
Yeah, and I agree to what you're saying, Kelly and Gina, both of you. Like, we should, this is a tool, like our tubes are tools to help our child. It's not like a substitute for reality. And can we feed them 3 meals and a little snack? Let's make it look typical, because that's what the human body does. So I think that makes sense. And some kids are real successful with just some schedule adjustments. But I will also say that one of the problems I run into in doing that are some of these kids have these volume limitations that you just cannot get past your 120 mLs or whatever it is at any given time.
She's pretty good on that part, thank God.
You're
Now with
lucky.
the pump, she was not, but this way she is. And I actually switched her off the pump when we got to the real food blends, because on the pump for a year it was Pediasure and it was hard. That was a hard year.
Yeah.
And that's why I wanted like real based food or blended foods, because that was just not working out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the hard part. I feel like with complex kids, it's like it's so individualized, and you have to be
Yeah.
you're always changing too. I mean, Mia's been syringe fed. She's been we had to go back to the feeding pump because she had, an issue with her digestion. And so you just have to find what works for you. And it's probably not going to be the same thing throughout their whole life. So that's like the good thing about the G tubes is, you have flexibility to kind of do what works for you in that moment.
That's my focus right now with her, is not actually weaning. I just was trying to get it to something to where she would be interested and we can work on our skills of actually eating by mouth.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's like, let's slow this down and stop putting all these huge goals on her when she's not ready.
Yeah. All right. The next question I have, and it kind of correlates with some of what we talked about, but at what point do you kind of make like the decision or, get to the point of feeling like a child needs, an actual GI doctor to really kind of guide them because they may need a G tube. Like say they just aren't getting enough calories and, their BMI is way
Really
too
low.
low and clearly like they're just not healthy. At what point do you kind of lead the family in that kind of direction of like those discussions about like G tubes and that they may need more support? Like what's your kind of take on that and your approach?
It's really tricky because, again, a lot of it's clinical judgment. There's not like people want there to be like, here's the number at which you needed to, but it's not that clear. The big picture is that I can function pretty well 10 pounds less and 10 pounds more myself, right? So weight is kind of plastic. But in terms of kids, they are not just staying in one place, they're growing and developing. So when we see, the only thing we can see on the outside without being invasive is linear growth. And if a child's not growing longer, we can assume they're just not getting enough nutrients for cellular growth, right?
Yeah.
And that affects everything, even though we only can measure their length. It is affecting brain, organs, everything if they're not growing longer. Well, that's tricky because, like you mentioned, trisomy 18 and lots of these kids with these other diagnoses aren't going to follow a typical growth chart. So that's hard too. And so it's really, really tricky, really, really tricky. And I don't think that there's a single answer, but if I start feeling like the child isn't able to participate in their therapies to their full potential, that's a red flag to me. Like energy, if they're not gaining strength, do they have enough nutrition to build muscle? If they just are sleeping too much, that's a red flag to me. And there's all these things you have to look at. And another thing you have to consider is families' ability. Some families are able and they want to make the kid make it work, and they're going to make the time to feed the child by mouth for an hour and use a supplemental and G tube as needed. And some families can't do that, right? They need feeds to be efficient for whatever reason. There's so many factors, and I know I'm skirting the question, but when I would talk to a family, I try and wait until I feel like we've exhausted all of our options and the child is not flourishing.
Yeah,
I mean,
that
I
makes
think
sense.
that's like the best answer. I mean, that's true. Every situation is different.
Yeah. And I feel like every family's goals and stuff are different too. So it's like you have to get to know them and kind of like where they're at and meet them there and then kind of give it time to kind of see where things are going to go and trial and error and then, work with them, I guess, if that's possible, depending on kind of where things are going. Because I'm sure that there's also instances too where the family just they've probably been told by a medical provider, like, you know, you might want to consider this, and they just don't want it, because G tubes are scary to people. I mean, we've all been there. And so I feel like that's kind of a whole nother conversation that we could dive
Mhm.
into is, you know, like the fears around it and stuff like that. And I also feel like sometimes families may hesitate and be like, you know, what do you mean my child needs a G tube? Like they eat just fine, you know, that's it's a tricky thing. So I imagine like in your position, you know, it's something that you have to be very cautious with how you approach it. And
For
it's
sure.
probably not going to be the same with each individual either.
At all.
Um,
And yeah. And some, um, rarely am I the first person who's ever brought it up.
yeah, that
It
makes
happens,
sense.
but
Well,
it's rare.
especially since, you know, we've already discussed like how very focused like the hospitals are on growth and stuff, you know, like you would hope that you're not the first one recommending it when, you know, if you're not above that 50% BMI for some of these specialists, they're going to be putting questions out there. So
Right.
that makes definite sense. So kind of switching gears then, do you have any other topics or anything related to G2 weaning that you want to discuss or anything like that, before we get into our last couple of questions before we wrap up?
I don't think so. Just one thing I'll point out though, people have different feelings about the tube. And like you said, Kelly, it was a loss for you, right? And some people feel relief by it. And there's just, you just never know. People are so different.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. And I mean, that's when Mia was born and we knew she had to get the G tube. It was like, it was scary. But now I'm like, wow, this is like her having the G tube is literally the best thing ever. Like,
Mhm.
like we kind of joked earlier, some of these kids get the best nutrition of the whole family. Like, I wish I
Mhm.
could have a G tube some days because it's like I can make sure that I'm actually getting my veggies and stuff because I
Yeah.
don't want to eat them orally. I don't like them, you know?
Mhm.
So it's definitely something that I feel like you get used to, but it's definitely hard at first. Especially when you're like in the NG tube stage and all that and having to place those, like that's very
Mhm.
intimidating.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
definitely went through that.
Yeah, that was terrible. Um, what are things that a parent should look for in a nutritionist when they're looking for one with their complex child?
I hate to say this, but I'm going to say it because it's just reality. Somebody who is fairly new dietitian is going to follow the book because that's what they've been taught. And you don't build your confidence and your skill without practice. So
Yes.
I think that's one of the things that's hard. And I hate to say that because I know there's wonderful young dietitians, but they're still learning. So I think that's
Mhm.
one thing. Another thing is, and you won't always necessarily know this, but you want somebody who's, if you don't feel like somebody's listening to you as the parent, they're probably already having an agenda in their mind of what they think is right and wrong.
Mhm.
And you need somebody who is A, going to listen and B, be open minded. So, I mean, you can test that out really quick by saying something wacky the first time you meet them and see how they react. And if they're like taken aback or they have a strong reaction, think twice.
Yes, for sure. Well, and it's interesting too, you say that about, you know, the young nutritionist, and in your situation too, like you weren't working with complex kids when you first started out.
I
Like you
wasn't.
had many,
No.
many, many years of experience before you started working with the complex kids. And I mean, you could probably speak to this too, but there's many typical kids that need to see a nutritionist as well as
Mhm.
adults. And so like there's a lot of areas for growth before you really get to like the kids that are very complicated and really need somebody that has that expertise. So that, I mean, that makes a lot of sense and is good advice for parents, I would say, is look for somebody that really has a lot of experience if you want to get, you know, the help like you've been able to provide us. So kind of going off of that, what training and education, like, do you feel gave you that experience, you know, with working with complex kids and with being able to fully understand blended diets and G-tube weans
Mhm.
and just like the whole spectrum of everything nutrition. Like I guess in a nutshell, even though you've probably touched on this quite a bit already, but like what really got you to this point that would make you a great provider for a complex kiddo?
Um, yeah. I feel in the area that I enjoy working, I feel like I've been very blessed with the experiences I've had. Now, on the other hand, I'm very pigeonholed. I have a very succinct set of knowledge about one particular thing, which is what happens, right? As you go down your career, you get more and more focused. But being in the NICU in a pediatric facility for 6 years, because you're learning to do things on a micro level. You're like looking
Mm-hmm.
at the tiniest little increments of everything. You're advancing feeds by 2 mLs per day. So I think just understanding at the micro level, and that was a huge learning curve for me. And the other benefit of that was getting familiar with all the formulas in the world, right? Well, not in the world, in the United States, we should be clear, but all the preemie formulas, all the elemental formulas, all the partially hydrolyzed, that, and just working with them day in and day out and rounding with the medical team every single morning and listening to them review all the child systems and all of the plans for respiratory and nursing for everybody. And you're listening to that pharmacy and you're contributing your piece, but you're also learning. I feel like I have a big picture of more than just the nutrition piece because I was able to have that experience. So that
Mm-hmm.
for sure. And then the GI experience I think is crucial as well. So you have the preemies and the medical team and the micro, and then you have the GI because of these kids, like one of the hugest barriers is the digestive issues and the reflux and the constipation, all of that, and really working with the GI patients and understanding even bigger kids that aren't complex, but understanding how all of that works is really crucial. So I would say that those two things are probably the biggest pieces that have contributed for my knowledge base. Plus, in within our professional licenses, we take ongoing trainings and seeking out the webinars, the seminars, the national meetings that are in that area of interest, where you're talking to other professionals who are working with similar population and attending trainings on similar things. All of those are the kind of things that I think really contribute to knowledge.
For sure. Um, yeah, that, I mean, knowledge is, I always like to say knowledge is power. So every, like, especially when you're in your younger parts of your career, it's just like you just have to be soaking all of it in.
Mhm.
And it's true too about the GI is like I feel like having a good GI with a complex kid is like it's hard to come by too. And it's interesting because I know in our experiences anyway, it's been hard to find a great GI doctor. And I think we've gotten very lucky with you, and you've been there since Mia was a baby, so we haven't had the kind of struggles that I know many parents face in finding a good nutritionist. I just feel like the gut is like so misunderstood, and when it comes to complex kids because of all the things that you said, the vomiting, the reflux, the constipation, all of it is just so much more heightens with a complex kid. And a lot of providers,
Right.
they don't find the answer, or they can't figure out how to make it better, and it just becomes a vicious cycle. So we're very blessed to have providers like you out there, and
Yes.
available. And we're very grateful that you did this for us because, like I said, a lot of people don't have, access to the types of providers like you. And so just even hearing from you for an hour and having access to your website and stuff, I think is going to be very valuable for
Good.
people in our community.
Yeah. Glad to do it.
Yes, I don't have any other questions, but is there anything else that you feel would be beneficial for, you know, us to hear on here? Otherwise, we can go ahead and end this. And, maybe for those listening, we can look out for something in the future with Betsy to kind of get more information around some of these topics if people are interested.
Yeah, I would love to. If you guys have a group that's interested, we can do a training or a class, or if you have dietitians who are interested, they can reach out to me. I'm talking to a couple others locally people about putting together a training for dietitians locally about tube weaning. So just, I think,
Okay.
Gina, you have to speak up and advocate and connect with other people. Um, that's the way to go.
Yes. No, that's very true. And I mean, we're grateful that you're willing to do that because I know it's hard for people to find information and feel comfortable. And we know that you can't be everyone's nutritionist, but
I
just
wish
that
I
little bit of
could.
information that you can give to people, just to maybe even have them be able to take that to their providers then to say like, hey,
Mhm.
can you help me further with this?
Yeah.
So yes, thank you so much for your
All
time.
right.
We're very glad we were able to do this with you.
Yeah. Thanks for inviting me. It was great. I had a good time.